done a kind of intro to that, but we can do it this way as well. You feel? Welcome to episode 5 of Govanhill 100 Rolls. I've been told that, well, I know that sometimes my answers or my chat's a little bit long-winded, so we're going to try something different today. 60 seconds, I'm going to answer your questions in 60 seconds, so here goes. Start the timer. What camera do you use? I use a Mamiya RZ67 medium format camera. How do you light your subjects? Most of the time I place my subjects in the shade to keep the lighting consistent. What is your favourite photograph? There's a saying in newspapers that you're only as good as your last photograph. My favourite photograph is the last one that I made. Do you use model release forms? I tend not to use model release forms, but I use rolling consent. So any time that the image is going to be used in a book or be exhibited, I always contact the subject and ask how they feel about it. Is the project self-funded? The project is self-funded. I was given a grant from the Film Photo Award for 100 rolls of film, so that's been a big help, but everything else I pay for myself. How do you approach strangers? I've learned to approach strangers openly, with a smile, usually identify something I love about that person. I ask myself the question, what is it that I love about them? And I tell them. How do you feel when you get a no? No's don't bother me. It can be a little bit disappointing because maybe I've seen someone that I think will look great in a photograph, but there's always another day. Often a no is just no, not for now, or no, I don't quite have the time, but maybe some other time. So hopefully that answered some of your questions. Perhaps you want a little bit more explanation, and some of the videos will go into those points in more detail, but feel free to send questions in while the project is still running, and I'll do my very best to answer them briefly, concisely. So here we go, we're going to talk a little bit about the photographs that I made for this particular batch. So one of the portraits that I made in this batch, it's not the best photograph that I've made, but it's quite a funny story for me anyway. I met Danny coming around the corner with some friends. And Danny was tall and he was striking, and I thought, he's dressed quite 50s look, or maybe early 60s look, kind of American look, and I thought that could be quite good. So I approached Danny and asked if I could photograph, but Danny was heading to work, he had minutes. But he agreed, so I thought, great. But I'm looking around and I'm thinking, right, where am I going to make this photograph? So you're going to have to forgive me. Anyone that's listening that's from Liverpool, please forgive me, because Danny's from Liverpool. And he said, what about over there? I said, right, okay, that might work. And he says, because my name's Danny and I sing. So he was pointing to a restaurant that he'd just seen, and the restaurant is called Danny Sings. So it was absolutely perfect. Now, the way I photograph, you couldn't see the name of the restaurant, but if anyone knows Govanhill, knows Victoria Road, and they notice the number on the portrait of the close and the portrait of Danny, that is Danny Sings Restaurant, because Danny, the subject of the portrait, sings. So there's 2 portraits in this batch that are quite close together, and I had a very Glasgow problem for these images. So I met Rebecca, and it was a football match on, and she looked super cool. She was wearing a Celtic top. So I thought, brilliant, and I made some photographs, and I really liked the photograph. But for the sake of balance, Glasgow being Glasgow, this project, in half of the city's mind, perhaps would be of no interest anymore if I've got someone wearing a Celtic top in it. So for the sake of balance, I'm thinking, I wonder if I can get someone wearing a Rangers top. So I'm tuned into that. I'm tuned into that thought in my head. And it's funny, when you're tuned into things, they tend to appear. You tend to notice them. So I was walking down the street and I saw a young boy with a football. So already I'm thinking football. I noticed he's wearing a jumper, but under that jumper there's a collar, and I could tell that was the collar of a Rangers shirt. So I stopped his family and asked if I could make the photograph, and specifically, the main reason I wanted to photograph Connor was because he was wearing this Rangers shirt in there, and that in this batch now I have that balance. We've got Celtic and we've got Rangers. No more problems. Another portrait that stands out to me from this series, it was early on, I think roll 43, it was a portrait of Lee. Now this came about in a different way. I saw Lee on Instagram and he happened to be getting a tattoo in Govanhill. I thought, perfect, I'm going to contact Lee, and it was just brilliant. We just had such a lovely time just chatting. He's a photographer, an artist, had moved back up from England. I saw some of Lee's work. He'd done this series on sort of fighting, is it cockerels? And it was just brilliant, but I really formed a connection with Lee. You know, sometimes these meetings maybe last a few minutes and that's it. And other times you form connections. And so this particular portrait, I mean, Lee's striking, so it was going to be a strong portrait anyway, but it means more to me because of the connection that came from that. So another portrait is a portrait of Lewis and Maxie the parrot. I've known Lewis for a long time, just walking around Govanhill, seeing him in the park, having chats, and I've always wanted to photograph him, but it was never quite the right time. One of the things that stands out sometimes about Lewis, interesting looking anyway, but often he rides his bike with a parrot, Maxie, on his shoulder. So when I see Lewis with Maxie on the shoulder, usually I can't catch him. He's going too fast. So one day I just thought, you know, I'm going to send Lewis a little message and see if today might be the day that he's up for it. And he said yes. Getting that portrait with Maxie on the shoulder for me was great. And again, it was a really nice time we had just chatting and getting to know each other a little bit better.